When loneliness speaks, what we feel, and why it hurts. There are moments in life that feel hollow, not because we are physically alone, but because something inside us aches with the weight of silence. This is loneliness, not just the absence of people, but the absence of connection, of being seen, of being understood. And the truth is, we all feel it. Loneliness is one of the most universal human experiences. It visits the heart of the widow, the artist, the overachiever, the man in a crowded room who still feels invisible. It comes at night, when the phone stays silent, when the conversation felt shallow, when the prayer seems to echo back empty. But loneliness is not just a social problem. It's a spiritual signal. Something sacred is speaking through it. And the question is not, how do I get rid of this feeling? But what is it trying to show me? C.S. Lewis knew loneliness well. Orphaned as a child, wounded by war, intellectually gifted but emotionally guarded, he lived much of his early life in the safety of books rather than people. But even in his most celebrated years teaching at Oxford, writing best-selling works of theology and fiction, Lewis was not immune to loneliness. And he didn't dismiss it. In fact, he explored it, he listened to it, he even believed it pointed towards something eternal. In The Four Loves, Lewis writes, "We are born helpless. As soon as we are fully conscious, we discover loneliness. We need others physically, emotionally, intellectually. We need them if we are to know anything, even ourselves." Lewis saw loneliness not just as pain, but as a pointer, a reminder that we were made for connection, and that even our deepest human bonds cannot satisfy the soul's longing for something more. Because at the heart of loneliness is a truth few dare to face, that no one on this earth can fill every corner of your heart, not fully, not forever. You can be deeply loved and still feel alone. You can be surrounded and still sense the ache, because your soul wasn't made to find its home entirely in this world. And so loneliness appears not to shame you, but to awaken you, to the need for connection, to the truth of your longing, to the echo of eternity written into the silence. But many of us try to escape this ache. We numb it with noise. We drown it in busyness. We chase distractions or achievements or shallow connections. Yet the ache returns, because it doesn't want to be numbed. It wants to be heard. Loneliness, when we listen to it, is an invitation, not just to reach outward, but to go inward, to ask, what part of me feels unseen? What am I longing for beneath this ache? And what if this loneliness is not a curse, but a teacher? In the next part, we'll explore how C.S. Lewis came to see loneliness not as an enemy, but as a companion on the journey, deeper love, and the eternal presence of God. Loneliness as teacher. What it reveals about who we are. Most people see loneliness as a problem to solve, something to fix, escape, or avoid at all costs. But what if loneliness isn't a punishment but a teacher? What if, instead of asking, how do I get rid of this feeling, we asked, what is this feeling here to teach me? C.S. Lewis lived this question. After years of intellectual pursuit of keeping others at arm's length, he began to recognize that loneliness, when faced honestly, was not weakness, a doorway into self-knowledge, into a deeper understanding of the human soul. In A Grief Observed, a raw journal he kept after the death of his wife Joy, Lewis didn't hide from his suffering. He let the loneliness speak. He let it undo him. "No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear," he wrote. "I am not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness." In his loneliness, Lewis discovered something powerful, that to be human is to need, and to need is not a flaw, it's a sacred truth. Loneliness reveals our dependency, not just on others but on something greater, on love itself. It shows us that we were not made to be self-contained islands. We were made for communion. But loneliness also strips away illusions. It reveals the parts of us we've been hiding from. In solitude, without distractions, the masks fall away, the noise fades, and we're left with ourselves. This is where the teacher speaks. Loneliness reveals your longings, not just to be seen, but to be known, not just to be liked, but to be understood, not just to be around people, but to be real with them. And sometimes, loneliness exposes the ways we've abandoned ourselves, how we've silenced our own truth to avoid conflict, how we've performed to be accepted rather than show up honestly, how we've filled our lives with motion, but lost touch with meaning. In this way, loneliness is not always about the absence of others. Sometimes it's the result of being disconnected from our own soul. And that's where the gift of loneliness begins to emerge. Because when you stop running from the ache and start listening to it, you begin to reclaim the parts of you that were left behind. You meet your vulnerability with compassion. You meet your grief with presence. You meet your inner child, your unspoken dreams, your longings, and welcome them home. This is the beginning of wholeness. As Lewis observed, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. And loneliness may be one of God's loudest invitations, not to shame you, but to draw you inward, to strip away the false self, and reveal the eternal one underneath. In the next block, we'll explore how Lewis discovered that loneliness, far from being meaningless, points us toward the divine, toward a love that no human presence can fully satisfy, but all our hearts still ache for. The ache for heaven, how loneliness points to something eternal. There's a kind of longing that no relationship, no success, no experience can fully satisfy. It lingers after the party. It returns after the achievement. It remains even in the arms of someone who loves you. C.S. Lewis believed this deep, haunting ache wasn't a flaw in the human design, but a clue to something beyond it. In Mere Christianity, he wrote, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." This is where loneliness becomes something more than emotional pain. It becomes spiritual homesickness. A signal that we were not made for ultimate satisfaction here, but that our souls were shaped for something eternal. Lewis called this longing Sehnsucht, a German word meaning yearning or deep desire. He described moments of beauty, memory, or stillness that pierced him with a joy so sharp it almost hurt. And yet, he knew that joy was never complete. It always pointed beyond itself. "All joy emphasizes our pilgrim status," he wrote. "It always reminds, beckons, awakens, desire, our best havings are wanting." In other words, the beauty and goodness of this world are not the destination, they are signs along the road. And loneliness, too, is one of those signs, because beneath every ache for human connection, there is a deeper ache for divine connection, for perfect love, for eternal meaning, for home. Lewis believed that God uses loneliness to awaken this desire, not to torment us, but to remind us, you were made for more, not more achievements, not more approval, but more of Him. Loneliness, then, is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that something is right with your soul, because you are still longing, still reaching, still sensitive to beauty, to truth, to love. And these longings are not weaknesses. They are fingerprints of your origin. They point to the reality that even the deepest human connections are echoes, not the source. Your friends' loyalty, your partner's love, your child's laughter. All of them are reflections of something greater, glimpses of a perfect intimacy we have yet to fully know. And so loneliness, paradoxically, is not only a pain, it is a promise. A promise that your desire for perfect love, for meaning, for peace, is not an illusion. It is a compass pointing toward God. As Lewis once said, "We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea." Loneliness is the hunger for that holiday, not of escape, but of return. Return to the source. Return to the presence. Return to the one who made you and who has never left you. In the next section, we'll explore how this longing, when embraced, becomes not a prison but a path, a sacred journey that transforms isolation into intimacy and waiting into wisdom. Loneliness and the soul's journey. From isolation to intimacy with God, loneliness can feel like abandonment, a vast silence, a reminder that no one truly sees the full weight you carry. But what if that silence isn't empty? What if it's sacred? C.S. Lewis came to believe that the pain of loneliness could become the place where we meet God most honestly, not as an idea or a ritual, but as presence. In The Problem of Pain, he wrote, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Pain breaks through the noise. Loneliness, in particular, strips us down to truth. It removes the distractions, the performance, the masks. It leaves us alone with ourselves and, often unexpectedly, with God. Not the God we try to impress, not the God we sometimes fear or misunderstand, but the God who sees you in your quietest hour and calls you beloved." Lewis once resisted this kind of intimacy. He kept his world orderly, rational, safe, but suffering cracked his heart open, and in that vulnerability, he began to experience God not as an abstract concept, but as a companion. This is one of the strange gifts of loneliness. It creates space for divine intimacy. When no one else is there, when you feel forgotten, invisible, or misunderstood. There, in that very ache, God can speak most clearly, not always in words but in presence and stillness, in the quiet comfort that says, I know, I am with you, I have never left. The Bible is filled with lonely people who became prophets. Moses in the wilderness, David in the cave, Elijah under the tree, even Jesus, praying alone in Gethsemane. They were not abandoned, they were being formed. Because loneliness can become holy ground, a place where the soul is refined. It's in the silence that we learn to listen. It's in the AHE that we learn to pray not out of obligation, but out of honest need. And it's in that honesty that intimacy is born. God doesn't require you to have perfect faith. He doesn't need polished prayers. He simply invites you to show up raw, real, ready. The prayer preceding all prayers, Lewis wrote, is may it be the real I who speaks. May it be the real thou that I speak to. Loneliness, then, becomes not a wall, but a doorway, a place of transition, a place of reorientation, a place where your soul learns to trust the unseen. And slowly, gently, your heart begins to change. You no longer depend entirely on others to make you feel whole. You stop chasing noise to silence the ache. You start to recognize the sacred, even in the quiet. You discover that God was never far. He was simply waiting, not at the edge of your strength, but at the center of your weakness. In the final block, we'll reflect on how to walk forward from this place. How to let loneliness shape not just your soul but your life. Not with despair, but with courage, connection, and purpose. From longing to love, how loneliness becomes a path to purpose. Loneliness begins as an ache, but it does not have to end in despair. It can end in love. Not just romantic love, but the deep, abiding love that arises from knowing, I belong, I am not alone, I am held. C.S. Lewis did not stay trapped in isolation. His life was transformed when love came knocking, unexpectedly, vulnerably, and beautifully through Joy Davidman, the woman who would become his wife. Their story, full of both deep connection and profound grief, reminded Lewis that love is worth the risk, even if it breaks your heart, even if it ends in sorrow. Because real love reshapes loneliness. It does not erase it, but it fills its silence with meaning. And that's the path we're all invited to walk. When you face loneliness honestly, when you let it teach you, awaken you, and open you, you begin to live from a deeper place. You stop trying to avoid life's emptiness and start allowing it to be transformed. You begin reaching out with more authenticity. You speak with more compassion. You listen not just to be heard, but to truly know another. Loneliness teaches empathy. It teaches you to see others who sit in silence. It gives you eyes to recognize pain that hides behind smiles. It makes you a gentle presence in a loud, distracted world. And most of all, it helps you recognize God in places you'd never expected. In the quiet, in the ache, in the stillness where no one else seems to be. But somehow, you are not alone. Lewis believed that even our longings, especially the ones that go unfulfilled, serve a divine purpose. They train the soul. They stretch the heart. They remind us that this life, as beautiful as it is not the end of the story. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, he wrote, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. So what does this mean for you? It means that your loneliness is not meaningless. It means your ache is not a failure. It means your desire for connection, for love, for purpose is sacred. And it means you are not alone in your loneliness. There is a path through it, a path of grace, a path of truth, a path where God meets you in the stillness and says, I see you. I have not forgotten you. I am with you even here. So let loneliness become a teacher. Let it soften you. Let it guide you. Let it lead you step by step, from longing to love. If this reflection has spoken to something deep in you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the Sower of Meaning for weekly journeys into the soul through philosophy, psychology, and the spiritual wisdom of thinkers like C.S. Lewis. Comment below. What has loneliness taught you about yourself or about God? And remember, you are not forgotten. You are not alone. You are being shaped, not in spite of the silence, but through it.